Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to call this meeting of the TRPA Environmental Improvement, Transportation, and Public Outreach Committee to order. The date is Wednesday, March 22nd. It is 10:33 a.m. The first item on the agenda is roll call to determine a quorum. Maria?
Ms. Conrad Seda. Ms. Faustinos,
Present.
Mr. Friedrich. Mr. Rice.
Here.
Mr. Settlemeyer. Ms. Williamson.
Here.
Ms. Conrad Seda
Here.
and Mr. Settlemeyer.
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. I'll now go over the remote and in-person meeting rules for the day. For members of the public who are joining us remotely, to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov. Under the calendar header, click on Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for March 22nd, 2023. There you will find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. To address committee members directly with your comments, raise your hand in the Zoom by clicking raise hand at the bottom of your screen at the appropriate agenda item. With your hand raised, you will be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you have used the dial-in numbers to join us by telephone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. For those who are remote committee members, and I don't believe we have any today, if you wish to speak, you could also raise your hand in Zoom. You'll find the hand icon on the bottom of your screen. Remote committee members may not use the chat box to make any comments or to have sidebar conversations. Please, everyone, remember to mute your mic unless speaking to cut down on background noise. And finally, I would also ask that all remote members turn on their cameras if they are able. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please raise your hand at the appropriate time for public comment, and you will be called to the front desk to speak. Committee members who are in person, please raise your hand if you wish to comment and speak clearly into the microphone in front of you. If you are viewing the webinar on a personal computer, please ensure that your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback. And now the next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Staff, do we have any corrections to the agenda? Changes?
Madam Chair, there is no changes.
Great, thank you so much. So Kim, welcome and congratulations on your new position with TRPA. We're so happy to have you join us in this new scope that you have.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We will deem the agenda approved as posted and as posted. And next on the agenda is approval of the minutes. We have a set of minutes before the February 22nd, 23 item on page 21. Do any members of the committee wish to make a change to the minutes as submitted? No? Okay, then I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes. So, okay. That's okay. All right. And we can do this just on a voice vote, correct, Mr. Marshall? All right. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, minutes are approved. So the next item on our agenda is an informational briefing on the Transportation Performance and Recommendations Report Framework. We will, all those items can be found on page 273 of your packet. And now we get to pass the meeting over to Michelle so that she can lead us through a presentation. Thank you, Michelle.
Good morning. It's great to be here. We've got a little bit of relief today and it's spring. Thank you, Madam Chair. Michelle Glickert, I'm the Transportation Planning Program Manager. So to start, I kind of want to back up a little bit and talk about the Regional Transportation Plan that's commonly referred to as the RTP. The RTP is updated every 4 years. That's one of our Metropolitan Planning Organization requirements. The RTP sets the vision for transportation, the transportation system in Tahoe. It's a system that is interconnected, interregional, sustainable, connecting people and places in ways that reduce reliance on the private automobile. So the RTP has 6 distinct goals: improving safety for all users, enhancing connectivity across and between modes, supporting economic vitality, protecting the environment with reductions in greenhouse gas and vehicle miles traveled, preserving the transportation system and coordinating operations to better manage it. And these goals have numerous policies, all of which make up the transportation element of our regional plan. The transportation performance reporting is about tracking how well we're achieving those RTP goals and reducing our per capita VMT. For some of you, that's tracking those resident visitor vehicle trips. And also, thirdly, identifying adaptive management of the system if we are not on target. Next slide. So today, onto the reporting framework that we've created. This has been over the past few months with the help of the Transportation Performance Technical Advisory Committee and consultant support from Cambridge Systematics. Those TAC members represent agencies we continually work with to implement projects and our programs, like the Tahoe Transportation District, our two state Department of Transportation agencies, the North and South Shore Transportation Management Associations, land managers, our county partners, the City of Southlake. Those are just to name a few. We also have on that technical advisory committee, the League to Save Lake Tahoe, representing the Tahoe environmental community. And we have a member of the public, Ms. Carol Black. I'm going to discuss our metrics for reporting, how we've incorporated adaptive management into the framework, evaluating our performance, and responses to adaptively manage the transportation system. Next slide. So along with the adoption of the 2021 RTP, the regional plan was also updated with a new VMT standard, and the implementation element of the regional plan identified 5 specific actions related to the new standard. Forgive me, that does not look that legible for many of you. I'm going to describe it here. So the first is establishing a schedule of milestones to measure progress towards the per capita VMT reduction goals. We completed that in April of 2021. That was with the adoption of the RTP. Those went hand in hand. Establishment of a technical advisory body for transportation, the Transportation Performance Technical Advisory Committee. I gave you a little rundown of that. We completed that last March. And third, the preparation of a charter, those primary objectives and a work plan was approved by the governing board over the summer. And then the Transportation Performance Technical Advisory Committee, that TAC, met and developed the charter and the materials, which was approved this past September. The last 2 items, those actions required, are what I'm going to be focusing on today. The reports that the advisory body must prepare and transmit to TRPA and the Tahoe MPO governing boards, and the adaptive management responses if scheduled milestones are not met, to be approved also by the TRPA and the Tahoe MPO. Next slide. Now on to the reports. Here's an overview, a little bit better up there. Report content as identified by that technical advisory committee is going to be high-level transportation metrics to track implementation of vehicle miles traveled reduction and achievement of our RTP sustainable community strategy goals. Secondly, reporting to provide guidance on the program, policy, and project modifications necessary to attain and maintain the new VMT threshold standard. And lastly, adaptive management responses that can be implemented if the region is not reaching vehicle miles traveled milestones. So every 2 years, staff and that Transportation Performance Technical Advisory Committee will prepare and transmit a performance and recommendations report to the governing board with review by this committee. This starts today with the framework we have before you. We're going to be tracking both VMT reduction and our RTP performance. And so then how it'll work in 2024, which is the end of next year, or the beginning, the first full report, sorry, the beginning of 2024. The first full report will be very focused on the regional transportation plan, and that'll be a recommendations report. So the report sets the stage for the preparation of the 2025 RTP. The performance report contains forecasts for growth, achievement of our goals, and that VMT reduction. Then the second performance report happens 2 years later. So we kind of get on this cycle of every 2 years reporting, a focus on the RTP and then on VMT. But this next report will be setting the stage for the 2025 RTP. So let's discuss the framework a little bit, the content of the reports, and then I'll come back to that report schedule to kind of help you understand that. Next slide. So the biennial reports will be structured by travel mode in alignment with our past regional transportation plans. The framework also utilizes a tiered metric system. So beginning with those primary metrics, with transit, for example, transit ridership will be collected on our fixed route system, as well as our new microtransit system. Considering how much service will also be looked at and the neighborhoods that are served. So that's really going to be looking to increase transit ridership. For active transportation, bike ped, overall mode share will be collected, and something new here that's highlighted, low stress bike ped lane miles. We have continually collected the amount of bike lanes and bike paths that we build in the region, but we've not really actually looked at the details. And those details matter, right? Not everyone likes to be riding next to vehicles traveling at 45 miles per hour with a 4-inch stripe, sometimes 6 inches. And others, what we really want to look for are those low stress facilities like our protected bikeways and bike paths, where peds and bikes feel a little bit safer. There's also slow streets in our region that are great for neighborhood riding. A lot of families feel comfortable on those slower streets, less conflict points. So we're going to be doing something new and looking at those options as well. So this again would be looking to increase our non-auto mode share and increasing that network of safe ped bike facilities. Now for automobiles, we're going to look at that annual average daily VMT per capita, right? Tracking everyone in the region and the amount of trips they take and how far they make them. So currently our baseline annual average is 12.48 miles traveled each day by everyone in the basin. So the goal here is to reduce that to 12.35. And so that's that target we'll be checking this year when our next report comes out. What's important to note about metrics and working with the technical advisory committee is that we will be collecting these primary ones every 2 years for a report, whether VMT focused report or the RTP, as I mentioned. And we're going to be continually utilizing the best data sources available. Things have changed a lot. Mode share, for example, can now be collected in a different way. In the past, staff and interns have been all out around the lake doing surveys and tracking folks at different locations. So working closely with research and analysis, which we've done with this report, we're going to be looking for the best data available for mode share and for VMT. Next slide. So the framework also has a second tier of metrics, and this is organized by supply, conditions, state of repair, and program and information. So this helps us to understand the why things may be getting a little worse or potentially even better. These are the first part of the adaptive management system that we have developed. So there's a menu of second tier metrics that will be collected with those primary metrics if we're not on track. Or maybe there are some circumstances the technical advisory committee feels warrant a deeper dive. Also tracking why something is improving, right? We can learn and replicate that. So using transit as an example, after we collect our primary metrics, let's say we see a dip in transit ridership, which is pretty realistic today. We can then look to see exactly how much service is being delivered versus what is scheduled. That speaks to our supply. Then our riders are able to actually access the bus stops. You know, this snow has been incredible. And no one, I think everyone is pleased, but at sometimes are the bus stops cleared? Are they actually able to get to those bus stops? So where the stops located, are the bus stops cleared is really important. So this helps us understand the condition of the system, for example. And then lastly, are people aware of transit options? Like, do they even know that we have microtransit on demand and fixed route systems that can get them around? So we do have a great time. We have a great real-time app, but sometimes it's not always showing the real time when the buses should be arriving. So those are some examples of what we might kind of dive a little deeper into. So this structure, collecting primary metrics each 2 years, taking that deeper dive, looking into some of those explanatory factors as needed, is all a part of that adaptive management process. Next slide. And now furthering that last piece on adaptive management, the biennial reports will utilize the data from those primary and secondary metrics as needed To understand the system and the performance, the transportation performance TAC will then be brought together to review those results, potentially identifying other metrics available that can inform performance as well. It's a very adaptive and flexible system. Then as the TAC with public involvement, they'll decide what needs to change to get us back on track. These recommendations will be proposed back here at this committee. For example, we'll use that transit ridership decline I mentioned earlier. So if the regional mode share analysis shows ped and bike trips are holding flat and transit ridership is decreasing, recommendations could include additional analysis, as I mentioned, to better understand where and why those underperforming routes are occurring. The additional analysis could then lead to potential policy decisions within the grant program that actually the Tahoe MPO administers. You're going to hear about that next month. For example, all eligible sources that qualify for transit operations. So any funding source that actually can go towards transit operations could be considered first for only transit operations, giving transit ops priority for those funds. Additionally, planning funds could be focused on working with our transit operators and TMAs on more program outreach and information sharing to encourage more people to get out on the bus and to use microtransit. Or we could also be helping implement the transit operators' transit plans with some of our planning funds here at TRPA. So the adaptive management process provides that menu of options based on data-driven analysis. Next slide. So here we are. I got to quit using these black slides. I think these are just not kind of coming through so well. So here we are. The top of the chart includes the TRPA board, commissions, and committees, and the lower half identify data gathering and outreach with local partner agencies who are also on the transportation performance TAC. We've already begun to focus on data collection for those primary metrics, and we're going to continue doing that during the remainder of this year. After the data collection, we'll reconvene the Transportation Performance Technical Advisory Committee, and those meetings are going to entail review of our progress, development of collective recommendations on the adaptive measures that I mentioned as preparation. Really, this will be the draft RTP SES focused performance report. So that'll be folding in a public meeting as well. And then back here, we'll have those draft recommendations at this committee. So you'll have an opportunity to review, comment, we'll go back, adjust as necessary prior to seeking adoption of the report, which is currently required in the second quarter of 2024. So about a year from now. I'm going to try to get this out a little bit earlier because, as I mentioned, this does drive the RTP and we need to do that sooner than a year prior. All of this work I've talked about today is in preparation for our next regional transportation plan. So how this works, so the 2024 performance report will be in view, as I mentioned, informed for the 2025 RTP. We're going to be looking at existing conditions, the forecast, how we're doing on that VMT reduction, and then adjusting and potentially, doing plan policy recommendations and program development, including, of course, the TAC members and the agency roles and the project and program implementers, of course. So that also entails you. So this committee, through public outreach and development of the next RTP, I don't know, some of you were around last year in the EIT, or last year, goodness, time flies. In 2020 and 21, when we were doing the regional transportation plan, this committee was a committee we met with on a regular basis, informed the progress. You helped steer the ship. And we're looking forward to that again this time around. So how the process kind of works is we'll repeat that. So in 2026, sounds so far away, we're going to provide a report to check in on VMT. So I mentioned every 2 years, we'll be doing that alternate check-in. That'll then be focused, we'll repeat RTPS, SCS, VMT milestone, and all adaptively managing the transportation system as we go along. Next slide. So that concludes my presentation. I know that's kind of a bit much to take in. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Michelle. So I'll turn now to the committee members to see if you have any questions. Please, Ms. Seda.
Well, first of all, thank you. Really helps to see the process and hear our timeline. A question for you on the data collection, are you distinguishing between sort of regular transit riders and occasional transit riders? Meaning people who are, or regular bike lane users and occasional bike lane users. And I'm asking this mostly because I'm interested in how we get tourists to use transit, microtransit and bike lanes more, right? To try to move some of that travel from personal vehicles into the other types of travel. So I'm just wondering, when you collect those metrics, do you have a sense of who's using it so that you can target outreach to those groups?
That's a great point. I don't know that we have in the past like been so distinguished, but some of our survey work does ask sort of where you were before, and we do get to some of those questions. So it's a great point. And we might have to do different targeting efforts depending on the occasional user. At the end of the day, we really feel like if we can make safe facilities, we're going to attract everyone.
No, that's good. I was just thinking, you could imagine signage on the routes into Tahoe with, notes on which type of transit exists and really encouraging people to get out of their vehicles. So depending on the type of usage that we're saying, or if you wanted to increase that usage more. So thank you.
No, thank you.
Any other committee members have comments or questions? Well, thank you so much, Michelle. That was a great presentation. And I also concur that, making sure we get the right type of research and data collection is so important. And, just being thorough in that, making sure that we're doing the outreach to the, communities that we know are dependent on public transportation and may not be tech savvy so that, again, the opportunities for doing geocaching and that kind of thing so that you can get information in that mode is great. But if you have, monolingual, users as an example that might not, show up in those kinds of efforts, just really want to make sure that our outreach efforts are comprehensive and use different methods to try to get the information.
Thank you, Belinda. John was reminding me that some of these new data sources can actually identify where that person,
Exactly.
lives on a regular basis. So we are really looking into that and looking forward to that. Additionally, Belinda, I think you had a great working session on equity. And so some of that's also being folded in here on the outreach we're going to be doing. Part of that is in preparation for the regional transportation plan, updating our public participation plan, which then sort of sets out how we do our outreach for all these other planning efforts. So we're really looking forward to making, stronger, bigger efforts to ensure that we're reaching everybody.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very, very much. If there's no other comments from the members, we're going to go to the public now. If anyone in the room would like to provide any public comment, love to hear it at this point. Okay, doesn't look like it. Do we have any public comment online?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have one hand raised. Beth Davidson, if you unmute, you can address the committee. Beth, I see you are unmuted, but I'm not seeing any reception on your microphone. If you check your audio settings, you might need to assign the correct microphone. Beth, are you able to try to unmute again?
Okay.
Madam Chair, unfortunately. Oh,
Can you hear?
yes,
Hello?
we can hear you now.
Oh, great. Beth Davidson. I'm from Incline Village. I've lived at the lake probably about 40 years and maybe more. Just it seems to me as I'm listening to this is the first time that I have joined a TRPA meeting. I'm interested in the next meeting, but this seems to, this particular meeting also seems to run right into what's going on next relative to the Tahoe area plan. I don't understand in terms of reducing vehicle miles traveled, how we can add more development to the lake and expect to get vehicle miles traveled. Personally, my husband and I tried to keep our travel to a minimum using the car, but we need to use the car. And so, for instance, traveling to Reno or Carson for Costco and other stores becomes, has been part of how we have supplies and so forth. And when we do travel the roads, we see them completely full of contractors and completely full of people all the time, whether we go over Mount Rose, whether we go 28 to Carson. And I don't know how one reduces that if you're going to build more housing at a denser rate on the North Shore. That some of this doesn't make sense to me. Maybe I don't know whether this is the place to speak to that by the committee, but please help me about vehicle miles traveled. I don't see how it reduces. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I can understand exactly where she's coming from. But one of the things we are doing at TRPA is thinking about where that new housing is going to be located. And focusing very much on affordable housing, right? Right now, we have people who've had to move out of the basin. Now they're driving back in. Their vehicle miles traveled every day is probably doubled, if not more so. So one of the strategies is the regional transportation plan. Developing all of these great networks and options are for those people here today, and for some of those people that we want to draw back in here today in affordable housing. Compact development in our town centers means shorter trips. So, but she's right, we all have to do our part. It's not that easy. Like, we all do have to do our part and maybe take one less trip a week, right? And watch that average come down. So it is a multifaceted system. Transportation isn't going to do it alone. There are other things that we have to do to kind of help keep us on track and reducing those vehicle miles traveled.
Thank you very much. Catherine, do we have any other members of the public that wish to speak online?
Madam Chair, there are no other hands raised to comment on this item.
Great. Well, thank you. One last opportunity for committee members. If not, this is an informational item. So just thank you very much for the report and keeping us on track with all these items. Next, we'll move to another informational matter on Cascade to Meeks Trail feasibility study. And that information is on page 379 of your packet. And I believe we're going to hear from Rebecca on this item.
Madam Chair, I'm going to kick this off while our team is setting up. Thank you very much. Julie Reagan, TRPA Executive Director. I just wanted to do a brief introduction while we're getting situated. And just to piggyback on the last discussion around different kinds of users on transit. What we have found in our history of the basin is if we offer folks other options other than the car, they will take them. And we have the data to support that. And I think that's an important framing for this discussion around a feasibility analysis, which is really exciting. And one piece of data that we have collected with our partners with the Transportation Management Association on microtransit on the North Shore and the South Shore is that a large percentage, anywhere from 40 to more than 60% of people riding Lake Link or TART Connect are workers, people getting to and from work. So we are getting better on the data collection process, and we're going to continue to do so. So I just wanted to give a couple of opening thoughts around this that relate back to the regional plan and the update of the plan over a decade ago now, to give a future for Tahoe that isn't so auto dependent, to have more options for walking and biking around the lake, which precipitated the creation of the Tahoe Trail. And it is our dream and our goal, and this board has weighed in a policy direction in the past to make that Tahoe Trail circumnavigate the lake. But there was a section between Incline and Sand Harbor that seemed impossible, was called the Impossible Trail of 3 miles, that actually was built and is seeing record usage and getting people more connected to the lake. What might even be considered an even more impossible stretch around Emerald Bay, we now have a feasibility study that says actually it could be possible. But what you're hearing today is not an alignment of any sort. It's really just a look-see at what could happen. And when you see photos and renderings, keep in mind nothing's been decided. And we're already getting public comment that people are afraid that we've already arrived at one particular route through this corridor of more than 10 miles. So this is a very early discussion, but an exciting opportunity for this organization to be a regional leader in what could be the envy of the world in terms of a trail around this most famous part of Lake Tahoe. So I'll turn it over to Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning. I'm Rebecca Cremeen. I'm a planner here at TRPA. And today's presentation is to share the results of the Cascade to Meeks Trail feasibility study. So I wanted to emphasize, as Julie just did, that we are still in the very early phases of planning this trail, and there will be more opportunities to evaluate alternatives and to engage with the public and stakeholders through more robust environmental analysis as we go ahead with this. This study gathered the best available information over the last 2 years with our agency partners, the public, stakeholders, visitors to the corridor, homeowners, and those that are very knowledgeable of on-the-ground conditions out there. This report will be the foundation for a more detailed environmental study. I'll provide the background and context for the project, and then we'll hand it to our technical team, Jason Drew and Dave Rios with NCE Consultants, and they'll walk you through the process we use to develop the potential trail alignment, and then they'll showcase some of the segments along that corridor. Next slide. So, right, let's put this into context. And as Julie mentioned, really this is part of a greater vision to complete the Tahoe Trail. So if you look up on the slide there, what we envision is a completed seamless network around the trail, an alternative way to get around Tahoe. So the dark green lines are those segments that have been completed, and then the yellow is where we're planning to complete segments. So as it is now, along the West Shore, you can go quite a ways, all the way from Tahoe City, from Truckee to Tahoe City, all the way down to Meeks Bay. And then on the South Shore, it picks up again down by Baldwin and Pope and all the way along the South Shore there. So that gap that you see between Cascade and Meeks is what we're studying today. And all of these trails take partnerships. And so those logos on the slide are all the partners we've been working with on this project. We have the U.S. Forest Service, as a lot of the land is managed in this area by the Forest Service. There's a lot of popular trailheads and recreation areas and desolation wilderness, linkages to beaches along the corridor, working very closely with Caltrans as well, who the trail would go along that right of way or near the right of way or across the right of way in many locations. State parks, we have DL Bliss and Emerald Bay State Parks in this corridor. And we're also working closely with the Washoe Tribe of Nevada and California to identify cultural and natural resources that we want to protect and we want to have the opportunity to educate the public about along the way. Next slide. So to better understand the corridor during the analysis process, we broke it up into a few segments here, and starting at Meeks Bay in the north, moving down through Rubicon neighborhoods, and then Paradise Flat through DL Bliss State Park, Emerald Bay State Park, and then down to Cascade. Next slide. So this trail has been identified in several plans, including the Regional Transportation Plan that Michelle was talking about earlier, the Active Transportation Plan, and the 89 Corridor Management Plan. The transportation vision is to protect Lake Tahoe's environment and improve the travel experience through sustainable transportation projects and programs, shifting the mode of travel rather than expanding our roadway capacity. And how we communicate these transportation options is also very important. And that is why we are integrating technology into transportation planning and visitor messaging. Next slide. So many of you may have experienced this at Emerald Bay in the summer, and this is what we're really trying to address. This congestion, parking along the roadways, causing resource damage, causing safety issues with folks walking into the roadway. So we're really looking at alternatives to this, to how it is today. Next slide. So this graphic is from the 89 Corridor Management Plan that was completed in 2020. And it shows us a vision of what we're working towards. Fewer cars, a higher percentage of people arriving by bus or shuttle. And if you see there, it's about 40% we want to see by bus, and about 10% would arrive by trail. The 89 Corridor Plan also recommends removing roadside parking at Emerald Bay and bringing people to destinations on the West Shore by a water taxi. So we understand that this trail is not the silver bullet that will manage vegetation, solve all of the visitation problems at Tahoe. It's one of many strategies that must work in tandem. And that's why we need to continue working with both public and private partnerships to investigate solutions through the Destination Stewardship Program and other initiatives. Next slide. So the goals listed here were developed by that agency steering committee partnership. And it's guided us throughout this process, this early phase of planning, and it will continue to guide us as we continue to the next phases of environmental on this project. And with that, I will hand the slideshow over to Jason Drew.
Good morning, Jason Drew, NCE. I was the project manager for the technical team that was helping TRPA and the steering committee with this project. So I want to talk a little bit about the process that was used to develop and deliver this feasibility study. Before I do that, I just want to reemphasize what Julie had mentioned earlier, that the feasibility study was not intended to design a project. The feasibility study was really intended to answer two questions. The first one was, can you actually find an alignment that's feasible and practical to have a trail through this 11+ mile corridor? And the second question was, if the answer to the first question is yes, what are some of the considerations and important points to think about as you might move into planning and design of that trail? So there was a 2+ year process that we've gone through to put the feasibility study together. It's what you see on the slide on the screen right now. It started in 2021. The first thing that we did was really get our arms around all of the existing data and information that exists for the corridor. As you can imagine, over the years, there's a tremendous amount of information that exists in documents and anecdotally for different agencies and partners who have worked in the corridor. So we spent a lot of time getting our arms around that data and information. We then had a kickoff meeting where we, with the steering committee, partner agencies, stakeholders, and the community, really laid out what the study was, what was going to happen, and the timeline for it. The next thing we needed to do was some pre-screening. As you can imagine, given the amount of time that people have spent thinking about and working in the corridor, there was a tremendous amount of potential alignment alternatives that existed within this corridor, more than feasibly could be looked at within this feasibility study. So the first thing we needed to do was some pre-screening to get that number down to a manageable number that could be done within the time and the resources that were available for this study. Once we did that, myself, my colleague Dave, and others ground truthed all of those alignments. So we walked this corridor north to south, south to north many times to get a real feel for the physical, the neighborhood, the community aspects that exist within the corridor and within each of those alignments. We then had to develop evaluation criteria so that we could have some meaningful way of looking at the variety of alternative alignments that existed within the corridor and be able to make some informed recommendations about what those alignments mean, what they could look like, and if they're feasible. As a part of that, there was a number of one-on-one meetings, public meetings, meetings with stakeholders to talk about developing that evaluation criteria. That is the image you see in the bottom left of the screen. We ended up with 22 criteria in 6 different categories. That was informed a lot by input from stakeholders as well as the steering committee. That kind of brought us to the conclusion of the planning phase and moved us into 2022, where we did the alignment analysis. So we then took that evaluation criteria, and the first thing we did is, in a quantitative way, applied it to the alignment alternatives that existed within the corridor so that we could have some repeatable and meaningful way of scoring and then ranking those alignments. So that was the early part of 2022. We then shared the results of that analysis with the steering committee, stakeholders, and the community through a series of workshops and surveys. Took all of that information, provided it to the steering committee, and they ultimately selected an alignment to be further evaluated as a part of the feasibility study. So that brought us to the end of 2022 and into 2023, where we are now. The first thing we needed to do once we had that alignment was lay it out on the ground, actually put it on the topography within this corridor and figure out where it could be feasibly located. As a part of that, we needed to do some initial engineering analysis to figure out where our structure is going to be needed. Where are there going to be bridges that are required to cross creeks, for example? Where would there be under crossings needed to get underneath the highway? We also looked at a variety of environmental considerations. There was a lot of data and information, as well as interactions with the agencies to identify cultural, scenic, biological, aquatic, environmental resources within the corridor. So that could be thought about as you laid the trail out. We also wanted to get a sense of what the trail was going to look like. That's kind of the first question people often ask is, what is this going to look like? So we put renderings and visualizations together to get a sense of what the trail could look like. So the image in the upper left is the alignment that was selected for review. The image on the bottom right is one of those renderings. When we pulled that all together, that's what created the feasibility study, the draft that was released to the public about 6 weeks ago. We've gotten comments on that. We're reviewing those and working our way towards finalizing the feasibility study. So we ended all of that with a webinar for the steering committee, stakeholders in the community, where we presented all that information. And my colleague Dave is going to walk you through some of those details.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Dave Rios with NCE. Very excited to be here and share with you guys some of the details of the feasibility study we put together. Jason mentioned two questions. First was, is there a feasible alignment across this corridor? And the second was, if there is, what are the considerations we need to think about? One of the products we put together to communicate these results and the findings was a story map, basically a web-based version of our report. So I'm going to blast through some of the information included on this story map. So I'm going to highlight first 10 locations that really give you a sense of the look and feel of what we could see out there, right? What are the opportunities? The first location I want to start at is on the north side of the corridor, right at Meeks Bay, where we have our first primary infrastructure improvement, which is an undercrossing. Shouldn't be unfamiliar. This is very similar to what was constructed on the East Shore. Again, this is just giving folks a sense of what it could be, right? This is potential. The details, the exact location, the parameters, the dimensions, all of that still needs to be worked out during subsequent phases of this project. Okay, just south of Meeks Bay, there's an unpaved county road grade where we saw an opportunity for a potential scenic viewpoint. Nice spot to take a break. This is a pretty basic rendering. There could be other amenities shown in this location, but just gives you a sense of what you could see along this Lakeview Lookout. That's what we called it. And then on the southern end of kind of this larger Rubicon residential area is one trail form that is going to be needed in several areas. Basically, the trail sits between SR 89 and private property. We need to balance that user experience with the rights of private property homeowners. In this case, the trail form took a screening treatment of vegetation. This could be a retaining wall. It could be some other structure. But again, just an example of a trail form you'll see along these locations where you have residential up against the highway. There's a lot of steep slopes across this corridor. Locating the trail along the right of way is going to be challenging. And so we need to come up with solutions to preventing this trail, holding it in place. And so in this case, it's a simple rock retaining wall. Again, it could be keystone, it could be wood, the details of which need to be worked out during subsequent phases. But this is a pretty typical trail form you'll see across the corridor. Continuing to the south, this is actually on Lester Beach Road, right at the entrance to Deal State Park. There's a couple locations where the trail is going to be off the highway, really maximizing user experience. And yeah, really just a basic example of what a trail might look like along the highway, but pulled away a little bit. There are going to be a lot of locations where we can take advantage of views of the lake, steep slopes. This is one example of what that might look like in the vicinity of Inspiration Point. In this case, it's a terrace retaining structure. On the east shore, we saw a lot of peer supported micropile construction. That might be something to consider here. But again, just a flavor, just a sense of what we might see. And then if we continue south in the Cascade Creek area, we saw an opportunity for users to take a break, catch their breath, enjoy the view before they make the trek up the hill toward Emerald Bay. There's a lot of really interesting geology, natural resources. This instance here, for example, just called out to a nice rest area. This is, again, along kind of that bank of Cascade Creek before you start making your way up to Eagle Point. The 2016 Emerald Fire, unfortunately took a lot of trees away from us, but it did open up a nice view. And this was one location we saw another scenic viewpoint opportunity. And just a rendering of what that might look like. And there's a number of proposed creek crossings, locations where the trail is away from the highway and we need to get over a drainage. In this location, we took advantage of an existing box culvert in the vicinity of Talat Creek and really tried to match the aesthetic of some of the other crossings on the south shore with those wooden plank. So that gives you a sense of kind of the look and feel, what we might see out there. Another big part of what we included within the feasibility study was really, what are the considerations for design, for environmental, for regulatory permitting? What do we need to be thinking about really for the implementers' benefit? How do we get these projects built? How do we move them forward? And so this next section dives into 10 specific buildable projects that we identified. These individual projects were established based on connectivity to existing trails, some of the points of interest across the corridor, including Meeks Bay and Deal Bliss. The red flags here denote the start and end for the projects. So you can see there's a Meeks, a Rubicon Forest, Paradise Flat. Deal Bliss has 2 projects included, one shown here, Deal Bliss North, and then Deal Bliss South. And then we've got 3 in Emerald Bay, one on the north side, one on the west side, and then one on the south side. And then 2 final buildable projects, one for Eagle Point and one for Cascade. They're all in that 1 to 2 mile length. Seemed like a reasonable bite size. But again, these can be cut up as appropriate depending on land ownership, depending on, you know, the input received during environmental review, et cetera. And so I'm not going to go into the detail of each of these projects. I'll just jump over a couple for one, which in this case is the Meeks Bay project. Some of the things we highlight are the proposed infrastructure improvements like the undercrossing on the north and the south side of the bay. The Meeks Creek Bridge is identified for replacement. The trails on the west side of SR 89 through the section. So, you know, a boardwalk, micropiles, some of these soft touch engineering solutions will be required. And then through the Tahoe Hills area, you know, we had a lot of really valuable input from private property homeowners, from the homeowners association groups. And so we didn't land on one alignment in this area. I think there's a bit of work to do to really understand what are the needs of the community? What is the most feasible location for this trail? So there's 2 options shown through here. This is that Lakeview lookout that we looked at earlier. And then we go into a bit more detail about some of the considerations for each project. Here's a quick snapshot of some of the statistics. Again, about 1 to 2 miles in length. And down here, so Meeks Bay is actually a pretty exciting location. There's a lot of natural resources, both in the meadow, along the creek, in the lagoon, at the lake, a lot of sensitive habitat, lots of sensitive species to consider. It's also an active project area. The Meeks Bay Restoration Project is currently underway. The Washoe Tribe of Nevada and California are also implementing a restoration project in the meadow. And Caltrans has also identified replacing the Meeks Creek Bridge, shown here on the right panel. And so we include some photographs, give examples of some of these considerations, including wildlife, some of the cultural resources, and some of the engineering challenges that will be faced. And then there's also a neat little slider feature here so you can see before and after. It's like it's not going to let me do it. And then here's that Lakeview lookout. So the last section I want to highlight is really about implementation. Okay, we're going to go on a panning journey here. So this is all the details for each of the 10 projects. A lot of content. The PDF was about 100 pages long, so there's a bit of detail. There's a number of appendices. And I would encourage you guys to take a look at that if you haven't. Okay, we're getting close. Okay, project implementation. So there's a lot that needs to be decided. There's a lot that needs to be considered before these projects are built, right? Environmental review is one of those. This is an 11.5-mile corridor. There's been 10 projects identified. How we handle the environmental review is one thing that needs to be worked out. Is it a programmatic analysis? Is it project level? Is it something in between? A bit of work will be required and a bit of coordination with some of the implementers for this environmental review process. We came up with a sequence of projects based on connectivity, based on constructability, the costs, land ownership. So this is one way these projects could be implemented. There's obviously a number of ways we could attack it. I'm sure there's external factors that will drive where we go from here. But this is one set of considerations in terms of implementation. We did include a set of photos that highlight some similar trails across the basin, whether it's amenities or infrastructure improvements, undercrossings, bridge spans, boardwalks. And then what I'll end on here is just preliminary costs. So we did put together 2022 costs, included a 30% contingency, and also included the soft costs. So the design, the planning, the permitting, the environmental review. Generally, we're in the $8 million to $100 million price range per project. But again, a ton to work out, right? This was a pretty high level look at the corridor. These projects that were packaged have a lot of refinement, a lot of further input that's needed. And yeah, there's a lot more work to do. So I think that's where I wanted to end it. I guess the last thing I'll say is there's a huge team that helps support this effort. Really, really neat project, really great to be sharing it with you guys today. So thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I'll just wrap up with the next steps for this project is really to identify a project lead. So where do we go next? You know, are we going to move forward with the environmental? And if we do, what is the scope of that environmental document? Will it be a programmatic looking at this whole corridor or taking bite-sized chunks of areas of recreation, the hotspots, and then also considering all the 89 corridor management plan recommendations for transit, parking management, and things like that. So we need to look at it holistically. So our next step really is to get the steering committee back together and work out those next steps for implementation. And for funding, we do have Lake Tahoe Restoration Act funding identified by the Forest Service to move forward with some level of environmental. So that's what we're going to be working on next is that discussion and where we'll go with that. And I think with that, I will leave it open to any questions folks have.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Any committee member questions, comments?
I'll just comment that that story map is amazing. So thanks so much for putting it together and bringing the PDF to life. I think it's great to show the sliders and everything else. And I would say for any members of the public listening, I would highly encourage you to check out the story map. It's just done very, very well. I just had a quick question on what's the total mileage of the section we're discussing today?
It's about 11 miles.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any further questions?
Thank you for the presentation. I agree. It's beautiful to look at. It's exciting to think about. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of detailed questions. I guess my ask or question is just as those steps get finalized, you bring it back to this committee so we can keep hearing on the progress because so many different directions and exciting things, but to start asking more thorough questions, I think will depend on where we're headed. So thanks for the update and please keep them coming as possible.
Great. Thank you. If there's no further questions and from committee members of the public that might wish to make comment, come up to the microphone. Does not look like it. Rebecca, do we have anyone online? I'm sorry, not Rebecca, Catherine.
Madam Chair, for
First, you have John Friedrich, a committee member, has his hand up.
Oh, great, great. Go for it, John.
What an exciting project. Thank you, Rebecca and team. So just in thinking about that, I appreciate the way you broke it into phases and the required steps. I mean, if you were to look out, I mean, what's the most ambitious timeline you could envision for breaking ground on those first phases with with the permitting and funding needing to come together, of course, but what are we thinking here if in your optimistic days?
I'll field that question, Jason Drew, NC. I think the best case scenario, John, is you're likely 3 to 4 years away. If you were to go today, you're 3 to 4 years away from a shovel going in the ground on the first project. And that's very optimistic.
One thing to consider is, for example, the Meeks Bay project right now. It's moving forward with the restoration. The environmental is almost completed. Caltrans has identified funding for that bridge replacement. So in that case, that could be sooner. Like that section, if we started and we did, we're definitely would design that bridge to accommodate the bicycle and pedestrian elements. So that, that is a component of the trail as well. Even though it's not one of these, the whole buildable segment, it is a portion of trail. So looking at it that way too, if we do some work in different recreation areas that would feed into this trail and that would be part of it, could happen a little sooner.
All right, thanks for that update. It's certainly an exciting legacy type project. That'll be another world-class trail segment and just serve a great recreational access need. So good work and thanks for the update.
Great, thank you. And now I think we can go to online comments, and it looks like we have at least one.
Madam Chair, Mike Gabor also put his hand up to respond, perhaps.
Yes. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Board, and TRPA staff. This is Mike Gabor with the U.S. Forest Service. I'm the engineering officer, staff officer, and participated with all the partners on this particular feasibility study, and we funded the feasibility study as well. Just following up a little bit on what Rebecca was discussing and Jason Drew, we are moving forward with environmental documents for various pieces at Meeks Bay and within Meeks Bay. And some of those aspects on that end of the trail are going to make some connections to the neighborhoods immediately to the south there. So there's some exciting things that we're able to work on immediately and some components within the corridor being implemented now, such as changes to the Bayview campground to a day use parking area. So we're beginning to implement components of the project. And what we're hoping to do is initiate some larger steps that would get us closer to realizing some of the things and aspirations that were in the corridor management plan that preceded the feasibility study. That's all I have. Thank you.
Great. Hey, any other comments?
If you're ready for public comment, Madam Chair, we have 3 hands raised online. The first hand up is Toby Tyler. Toby, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
My name is Toby Tyler. I am representing the Tahoe area group of the Sierra Club. Although we support reasonably sized bike trails in general for Tahoe, we do not support building a 14-foot wide road, including the 2 feet of shoulder on each side with 129-foot tall retaining walls, which weren't mentioned in the presentation, through undisturbed forest that is nesting habitat for northern goshawks and ospreys. If any bike trail is built, the least impactful way would be to put it next to the road wherever feasible. Something needs to be done about Emerald Bay's overcrowding issues, but trying to accommodate more and more people into the area by providing a huge bike path that will have substantial impacts on the environment is not the responsible and prudent way to solve this overcrowding issue. A preferable alternative to the overcrowding issue at Emerald Bay would be to either a reservation system or the shuttle service. Reservations and shuttles are how many areas throughout the world address the issue of a place being loved to death. Thank you for your time.
The next hand raised is Doug Flaherty. Doug, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you, members of the committee. Doug Flaherty, TahoeCleanAir.org. one thing that TRP and its partners are really famous for is avoid cumulative impact, environmental impact statements. That's why you guys have already prepared to do this incrementally. World-class projects invite world-class overcapacity. So basically, I just want to make this statement that you guys are going to have a really uphill battle on your hands if you try to do this project incrementally. And I will speak to the Forest Service on this. I'm a little bit surprised that they're sponsoring incremental steps already with environmental review processes. And I hope they're noticing the public of their intent under NEPA. So I don't think you guys are going to be able to just smooth sail through the environmental impacts without considering the entire cumulative impact of the entire project. Thank you so much.
And the last hand raised is Denise Davis. Denise, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hello? Hello?
We can hear you.
Oh, thank you. This is Denise Davis, Incline Village. Your pictures at the end of your presentation, we're missing one key photo, which is what the trailheads look like. The trailhead for the East Shore Trail here at the old Ponderosa and Tunnel Creek are just as crowded as some of your photos of Emerald Bay. The traffic and congestion problems on State Route 28 have just been pushed into the Mill Creek neighborhood. So I hope that while you're working on your feasibility study and your plans, you will look at the unintended consequences of projects you've already done and take into consideration those effects on your plans. Thank you.
Madam Chair, there are no other hands raised to comment on this item.
Great, thank you, Catherine. Turn it back to the committee for any final remarks. No? John, you okay? All right.
Yes,
There are
I'm
no-
fine.
Great. Okay, if there are no further comments, this is an informational item. So thank you to staff for the presentation and the consultants, and we'll expect to hear from you on progress being made.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we're moving on to item number 5 on the agenda, which is upcoming topics. And this item is also informational. So Kim, I believe you're going to be walking us through this report.
That's right. Thank you, Madam Chair. For those of you that haven't met me yet, my name is Kimberly Chevalier. I'm the new Chief Partnerships Officer here at TRPA, and I'll be overseeing the Environmental Improvement Department as well as transportation. So I'm really excited to work more with this committee in the future. To give you a sense of the topics we have coming up over the next few months, we do have a few. Next month, transportation funding. We want to give an update on the 777 strategy, which is the shared sustainable funding strategy we have between federal, state, and local partners. The Tahoe MPO Regional Grant Program will be recommending $11 million in funding for 7 different transportation projects. So we'll be seeking a resolution on those projects. We also will be seeking a resolution for amending the 2023 Federal Transportation Improvement Program, so we can advance implementation on the SR 28 corridor and the new Kale Drive Complete Streets project. We also want to do a briefing on the first ever regional trail strategy, which has been underway with many different partners to provide a blueprint for connected dirt trail networks. And we do want to do the transportation overall work program. We want to seek a recommendation to the TMPO for transportation planning FY23 and 24 annual work program. And lastly, I heard from this committee last month when I was attending. I heard from you, particularly Belinda. We'd like to see some more of the restoration projects. So I would like to program those in the next couple of months, give you all a sense of what our priorities and what's underway in forest health and watersheds and water quality, aquatic invasive species, all of those programs, because we've got a lot coming up this summer. So excited to bring all of those to you.
Great. And if there is a way to incorporate some kind of a field trip, those are not, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. We love field trips. We've got lots of great spots we can take you. So I'll put that on the agenda as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Okay, members of the committee that have any comments, questions on upcoming issues? John, you okay?
Yep.
All right. Okay, hearing none from the committee members, any member of the public wishes to speak on this item. And if you're online, you can raise your hand virtually.
Good morning. I'm very happy to see and hear, oh, Ellie Waller for the
Yes,
record.
thank you.
Happy to hear and see what's in the upcoming topics. Welcome, Kim. Always nice to have new faces. And I wasn't going to speak today, but of course, my recent public comments are some of them are gonna get covered. Thank you.
Great. Anyone online?
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised online to comment on this item.
Great. Okay, then this item was just informational, so we could move on to the next item on the agenda. And that is committee member comments under item 6. Do we have any committee member comments? John?
Oh,
Okay. All right, so we will go ahead then and see if, now do we actually have to call people by name? There's that note in my, no, okay, great. All right, so we'll go to the final item on the agenda for public interest comments. And if any member of the public wishes to speak on this item, now's the time to step forward or raise your hand in the Zoom. This is a general public interest comments for this committee. No, we have not done that yet. No problem.
Elizabeth Learnhardt, Zephyr Cove. I'm not talking about the Meeks Bay or what you presented right now. I'm talking about your East Shore Management Program. Because reading some of the studies online that you have, it's clear you want to modify the behavior of diverse group of people with different needs without even acknowledging them. You do not seem to be distinguished between the seasonal changes in the riders' needs. This extreme winter weather has shown that there is no bike riding. By the way, can I have a raise of hand who came here today with their bike? No, I think so. But anyway, how can you expect anybody even to survive waiting for a bus like in South Lake Tahoe for 60 minutes? That is if the bus does arrive. Since Thanksgiving, it hasn't regularly arrived. And last time you had a public comment about this that explained all that. Apparently there's a bus driver shortage, and thanks to the huge snow berms, even some Uber and Lyft drivers were discouraged. This is not improved by lakeling cannibalizing the existing system by paying drivers more and not requiring commercial driver license. So I don't think shifting from one system that doesn't work to another one is not going to be helpful. Then there's your fascination with the bikes. Tahoe has 600 miles of bike trails. So I guess we need another one. The decision to use a more economic way, constructing your state line to state line bike path in Nevada by trading motorized vehicle use of Highway 50 for bike and pedestrian use is simply not feasible, nor is it fair. As NDOT states, expanding the paved roadway capacity is inconsistent with adopted policies, except when it comes to the Meeks Bay plan, as we just heard. So unadopt them, please. There's no clause in your compact prohibiting the widening of roads, new roads, or asphalt lanes for bikes, as we just heard. You broke your policies for multiple other reasons, but particularly close by the Round Hill parking lot that you created last year, which is, I believe, asphalt. Why are the 5,000 residents in Douglas County less important? And where are the options for the Douglas County residents? There's no public transportations here, and there never will be because we're just not that many. And even the microtransit does not include us. So sacrificing the 4 lanes on Highway 50 will never work in reality. This winter has shown this clearly. Narrowing the lanes, as some of the more recent plans of NDOT shows, from a 13-foot, 11-foot system down to 10 or something around there, it's not gonna work. Where's the snow gonna go? Where's the snow plow gonna go? It's right now, it's not feasible. And the proposal that was put forth by Ms. Murphy is a very good thought in summer, but not practical in a winter like this winter. And it's not safe either. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments in the room or online, Catherine?
Madam Chair, we have 2 hands raised online. Toby Tyler, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
My name is Toby Tyler, and I'm representing the Tahoe area group of the Sierra Club. We've stated before that we have a carrying capacity issue here in the basin, and the trajectory of increased density and height throughout the basin are on a collision course with increasing environmental degradation. I bring your attention to the excellent opinion piece in the Reno Gazette Journal, Tahoe's Future Hangs in the Balance Again, which I include here for the record. The cumulative impacts from the numerous development projects and the allowance of greater density and heights are not being evaluated, which violates the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, and California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, in California. These developments do not address affordable housing needs and will result in increased population and transportation pressures at a time when we already exceed anyone's vision of maximum carrying capacity with the 60 million visitors per year. The TRPA has basically eliminated the VMT standard and now is opening the door to increased traffic nightmares and environmental degradation from additional people in the basin. TRPA is not complying with NEPA and CEQA with your environmental checklist, which most projects are approved under. Increased density puts the entire community at risk in the event of an evacuation because of fire or other disasters. It also increases air and water pollution because of increased fossil fuel bikes, cars, boats, and snowmobiles that come with increased density. Thank you.
And the last hand raised is Judith Miller. Judith, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Good morning, committee members. I'm a resident of Incline Village, and my comment applies not specifically to the East Shore Trail, but to all of the planned multi-use trails. They have not contributed to lessening of traffic in the basin, and that's because they're simply not designed with a cyclist in mind. If you try to ride a bike, a typical commuter bike would be going 15, 20, 25 miles an hour. And that's simply not possible with the amount of visitors that we have here that use these trails. It's not used as transportation. And I think it's really dishonest to promote these as a transportation solution. They're not. Have you done any studies to see just how many people use the East Shore Trail for transportation? I don't think it exists. It's a handful, perhaps. But why would you park a car and pay money to get on a trail and to be slowed down to the pedestrian pace of maybe 2 miles an hour? It's not practical. It's not transportation. So please rethink the transportation element of these trails and provide a trail that a cyclist could actually use to get to work, to get to school, to get around the basin. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, we did have one more hand go up. Doug Flaherty, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you, committee. I have to agree with both speakers, especially Toby Tyler. The UC Davis State of the Lake report and obvious self-evident observations by pretty much everybody in the basin. Lake Tahoe Basin is in environmental freefall. It's out of equilibrium. Basically, this is due to the incremental impacts of public and private projects that the TRPA and its quote unquote government partners continue to progress through without a cumulative environmental impact statement. TRPA and its partners have been colluding for quite some time now to put a push on increased height, density, and coverage. And as a result of this, I think the TRPA needs to step back. You're moving too fast, too quickly, too far. And you've been colluding to put together the Washoe Tahoe area plan amendments, the Placer area plan amendments. You're moving ahead with increases in height, density, and coverage. So we need to have a environmental impact statement considering the cumulative impacts of all of those plans and amendments before you put them forth. You know they're coming. You've been working on them. You've been colluding. You've been plotting and planning incrementally. And it's time to have an environmental impact statement regarding cumulative impacts of all past, current, and proposed projects since the 2012 regional plan. The plan is dated. I've provided a significant list of changes since then. And we need to take all of those projects and take a hard look at what you guys are proposing. Massive changes and increases of human and traffic capacity. Absolutely unheard of. Not sure why you continue to go down this path. You guys are killing the lake. You're not a voice for Lake Tahoe. You're a voice for overdevelopment, developers, and increased height, density, and coverage. Thank you so much.
Okay, there are no further public speakers. We will go ahead and close the public comment period. Next on the agenda is a motion for adjournment. Do we have that? Great. We have a vote on that. Those in favor? Aye. Any abstentions? No votes. Okay. We are adjourned and